Well, good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, as we go into this time of teaching on the Feast of Purim. So let me just go right into my PowerPoint and walk you through what I believe are some of the key points of Purim, but also some of the key lessons that we can learn. It's such a wonderful feast. So let me go right into, as I said, the um, just a second. Here we go. And happy Purim. If I were to be saying it the correct way, it would be Haxmeik Purim, and uh, meaning happy Purim, happy holiday Purim, if you will. And again, here it is, Feast of Purim. I wanted to begin by just an overview of the feast. As we know, there's three spring feasts, and there's three fall feasts, and there's a middle feast. So we see Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits. Those are coming up, by the way, in the next month. Then you go to Shavuot in the middle, and then you go to the fall feast, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot. But there are two other feasts that are outside of that. And the one we're dealing with this week, at this time, is the one called Purim. And it would be just before the spring feast. So if you can see my cursor, it's just over here. And that's the one we're dealing with at this time. And of course, Purim is a time when we see that there's an attempt for the Jews to be annihilated. Now, the other side of the spectrum, after the fall feast, we have Hanukkah. There's another attempt to have the faith of the Jews annihilated. So we see those two outside feasts as being particularly special. Now, we do see also here the anti-Semitism being raised up, and we just want to acknowledge that that is really a strong part of what we're facing in the world today. Here we go. I want to just begin with the talk about anti-Semitism. Now, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance was formed in 2013, and in 2016, they came out with a definition of anti-Semitism. Canada has signed on to this, and 34 other nations have come on, and they wanted to have something that nations could sign on to and agree together. So they came out with this definition. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred towards the Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Amazingly, some nations have had problems with that and think that it's stopping all criticism of Jews and Israel, but that's not the case of that. But let me just put on in the Middle Ages and before, going right back to the early centuries, which I talked about last week in a message, that Jews were hated because of their religion. And in the early church, it was because it conflicted with Christianity, or so the leadership very often tried to place upon the people. But then in the 19th and 20th century, especially we're coming through the Second World War, and we come to the fact that the Jews were hated because of their race. Okay, and then we come further to today when Jews are hated because of their national state, Israel. So it's more directed at the state of Israel than it is at the religion or their race. And we go on to say anti-Zionism has become parallel to the anti-Semitism. The anti-Zionism has become actually the new anti-Semitism. And Israel is regularly accused of 5 crimes against human rights: racism, apartheid, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and attempted genocide. And Israel is increasingly questioned on the right of the state of Israel to exist. And that continues on to today. Certainly Hamas, Hezbollah, different other groups like that, Iran, they question the state of Israel's right to exist. Also, BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions is a form of anti-Semitism. So many of the nations who have come on and agreed with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the definition would agree that BDS is definitely a part of that. Now, the new anti-Semitism announces itself through the hatred of Israel, comparing it to Nazis, declaring it guilty of the worst human acts. And these are the 3 that come out in the last 2 years. We've seen it again and again come forth for those groups, people who hate Israel and hate Jews, but apartheid, genocide, colonialism. So having said that, where does this all begin? Natan Sharansky, by the way, in 2019, he came up with this statement: to distinguish between legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism. 20 years ago, Israel formulated a 3D test for anti-Semitism. The 3 Ds are demonization, delegitimate, I have trouble with that one, delegitimization, and double standards. These are the 3 main tools that anti-Semites employed against Jews throughout the history. This test shows that the same tools are being used today against the collective Jew in the Jewish state of Israel. Now, having said that, again, I want to go back. What are the roots of this? Where did all of this come from? How did it come about? Well, this one here is a story of Exodus 17, verse 8 to 19. And if we go into that story, it's a story about God commanding Moses to deal with the Amalekites. And when he does that, he calls Joshua to get the army, go into Rephidim, have battle with the Amalekites. Amalek being the leader of the Amalekites. And so Moses goes in, but he noticed something when the battle was going on, that whenever he would lift his arms, the battle would be won by the Jewish people. Whenever he lowered his arms, the Amalekites would be winning the battle. So he called for Aaron and Hur to come and stand and hold his arms up. It may have looked like something like this, with Moses with his rod. He may not have had the rod. It just says they lifted his arms, and they lifted it until sunset, and they actually won the battle. So it says in Exodus 17, verse 13 and 14, so Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Okay, so this is what God has said he's going to do. And then going on in verse 15 and 16, Moses built an altar and called its name, the Lord is my banner. For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. And that's basically what we're seeing today. We're seeing that battle go on, and the Amalekite spirit going on, touching leadership all across the world. Now, God said, why this attack was so reprehensible. And you go to Deuteronomy 25, verse 17 and 18. What was going on with Amalekites and Amalek? And then it says in Deuteronomy 25, remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you on the way. Now, this is Moses leading the people out of Egypt, and then something happened. And so it says, Amalek attacked your rear ranks, all the stragglers at your rear when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God. So those two things, they attacked the weak, the cowardly act. He did not fear God. So that's behind that whole anti-Semitic spirit that we're even seeing today. Now, Deuteronomy 25, verse 19 goes on and says, therefore it shall be, when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies all around, in the land in which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, here it is, you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. So do not forget it. Now, so God is saying, you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek. And so he gave that task to someone. And this someone is pictured here. Who is this? This is King Saul. And Saul was given this in 1 Samuel 15. You can read it, verses 1 to 35. I'm just going to bring out a couple of verses. But Samuel, in verse 1 of 1 Samuel 15, Samuel also said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore, heed the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came out of Egypt. So here is God saying, I'm going to fulfill this. I'm going to appoint Saul to do this. He's calling Samuel to be the spokesperson, be the anointer. And then in verse 3 and 4 of 1 Samuel 15, now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them. I know we find that part a little bit hard to understand, but God was saying he knows how evil continues to regenerate itself. He said, wipe out everything here. But he says, here it is, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. So Saul gathered together the people together and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and lay in wait in the valley. Now here was this battle going. And Saul attacked the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is east of Egypt. He also took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive. Now remember this verse, because it's going to come up again in what we're going to be talking about here today. He also took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and the oxen, and the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good. And they were unwilling to utterly destroy them. Now everything despised and worthless that they utterly destroyed. So here we have an example of a disobedience. Saul was the one that was empowered to do this, and God calls Samuel to confront Saul for what he has done. Saul actually meets Samuel and says, I have done everything I have been told, even though it was a direct act of disobedience. And Samuel says, so what's the bleating I hear in my ears? And Saul then says, well, the people wanted it. The people were calling me to do this, and I had to do that. And he said, but we took the best of the lambs for sacrifice to the Lord. So we're going to use them for sacrifice to the Lord. And Saul, of course, then replies, Samuel then replies to Saul. He says, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Wow. Then he goes on to say, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. Now, this time we read that Samuel actually kills Agag, and then Saul departs from Samuel. So it appears that the Agagite line has been destroyed. However, we read in the Purim story, here's a little bit of the background, in Haman, who's the one who is going to plot to exterminate the Jews. It says in Esther that he's the son of Hamadatha, the Agagite, had an inbred hatred for the Jews. So somehow the Agagite line got passed on, and some would say that what happened was Agag, that was killed by Samuel when Saul had not done so, was killed by Samuel, but had a wife that was not killed, and she was pregnant with child, and the Agagite line continued on. Perhaps, we do not know for sure, but it says also here, Haman was an Edomite, and he was through Esau's grandson, Amalek. Do you see that? And Agag was the king of the Amalekites. So the lineage going back indicates very clearly that Haman was from the Edomite lines, from Esau's line, and Esau's grandson was Amalek, and that same spirit of Amalek passed down through to Haman. That is what we see has happened. Now, let's talk about this anti-Semitism that continues to flourish today. What's the most modern version of anti-Semitism? It's exhibited by this man, Ayatollah Khamenei. He's the leader of Iran, which is, formerly was Persia. So this man has just been passed on this anti-Semitic spirit. And Khamenei says that he is going to destroy Israel. He is about to create a nuclear bomb. He is going to wipe out Israel from the face of the earth. Again, that anti-Semitic spirit, very, very strong. Here's another man who has much anti-Semitism, had anti-Semitic blood in him. This man is Joseph Stalin. Now, Joseph Stalin, he actually voted for the creation of a state of Israel alongside with a state of for the Arabs back in 1947 of November. And many were surprised when he voted this way. The resolution was placed at the United Nations November of 1947, and he voted for Israel to become a state alongside the Arabs. He was at the beginning of the resolution, the votes being taken, he was gave his vote, which surprised and shocked many of his allies who, again, they were against England, against most of the Western nations. And as a result, his vote swayed a lot of people, a lot of other countries to vote the same way. And the resolution passed. Of course, the Arabs declined, have nothing to do with the resolution. And in the 1948, May 1948, Israel declared their nationhood. But this man, you'd say, why would he vote for this resolution involving Israel becoming a nation? Well, because he hated England so much. England was the one who was his arch enemy. And so he voted against England in this vote. And as a result, we have this being passed. But this man did have an anti-Semitic spirit. He hated the Jews, even though he voted in 1947. He hated them so much that he came up with a plan to destroy them. It was just about to be put in place in 1953. He was a week away from declaring that he was going to wipe out the Jewish people. His plan included all the Jews. And but he had a stroke a week before the declaration. God took him out, and as a result, it stopped. The plan to destroy the Jews stopped. Then we have this man. This man is Hitler, of course, the Holocaust, and his plan again was to destroy the Jewish people. His plan was called the final solution, and he was right until the end, till his death, he wanted the Jewish people destroyed. Now, this was spurred on by this man as well. This man is called Joseph Stryker. He was initially Hitler's right-hand man. He was placed in the position of being a head of the Der Stürmer, which is the German newspaper, the largest in the country, supported by the state, filled with anti-Semitism. Joseph Stryker he hated the Jews. He was the greatest anti-Semite at the time. He would just spew hatred of all kinds. Many people could not stand him because of his hatred, such as Hermann Göring, who opposed him. And in 1941, he was Stryker was removed from his position of authority, political, but he continued on with his newspaper, and Göring there rose to the very top of his career. He was second in line to Hitler, but this man, Joseph Stryker, continued on with his hatred. And when the war was over, he was found wandering around in Holland and was identified, taken to the Nuremberg trials in 1946, was the first to be convicted of being anti-Semitic and deserving death. And in the end, there was 11 that were to go to the gallows. 10 only went. Interesting, you hear the story of Purim, but 10 went to the gallows. Hermann Göring took his own life before the gallows. And this man, as he was going up the steps, the final words that he spoke, Joseph Stryker said, "Purim 1946." Everybody was shocked. Nobody knew where that came from, but it's showing the anti-Semitic roots going right back to Purim. And but they hung him. He dropped down through the floor, and he didn't die immediately. They heard the gurgling, they heard the struggling, and they went and finished his life underneath the gallows. And so we see, again, this whole area of anti-Semitism. Now, this picture is the first one I want to show with, this is Haman, or Haman, pronounced either way. I'll probably use Haman for the rest of this message. But Haman was the one who was raised up to take out the Jews in this time of Purim. Now, in Esther 3, verse 1, it says, "After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite." So here we see it, the Agagite. So apparently we see that the Agagite line coming through Agag, the king, had not been destroyed. And I mentioned before a possible reason, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. So he became right to the top of the throne. He became King Ahasuerus' right-hand man. And I just want to continue on by talking about Purim that falls on Adar 14. Adar is the 12th and the last of the biblical months in the Hebrew years. Just a month that sometimes is repeated as they adjust it to the solar calendar, the Gregorian calendar. And then it's a 2-day feast, and it falls on this year, 2023, Tuesday and Wednesday. It begins on Monday evening, going into Tuesday, going into Wednesday until sunset, March the 7th and the 8th. And the fast of Esther is held the day before. Now, normally it would be a 3-day fast, but that 3-day fast would, if it would historically correct, would go back to time of Passover. And so the Jewish rabbis have moved this fast of Esther to 1 day, and it's the day before Purim. So it's a day this year, Monday, and it goes from dawn to nightfall, just morning until night, by halakhic rule, by the orders of the rabbi. And so in the Book of Esther, it takes place, just to put it chronologically in place for your minds, it took place in Persia, which is today Iran, in 483 to 473 BC. So just to help you with the chronology, remember that before this time, where this took place, with Esther and Haman and Mordecai, you'll see, is the Assyrians had captured the northern Israel in 722 BC. Remember, they came in, and Sennacherib, he came in to take both the north and the south, but when he took the north, he was stopped by Hezekiah's prayer that an angel was sent, an angel of the Lord was sent, and decimated 185,000 of the Assyrian troops. And so Sennacherib went back to the land where he died immediately. So then came along the Babylonians. They overtook the Assyrians, and they captured southern Israel in 586 BC, destroyed the temple at that time. And so then the next that followed them were the Medes and the Persians. Now, the Medes today would be called the Kurd Empire, but they diminished in this time, where the Persians, although started out with the Medes, defeated the Babylonian Empire. The Medes decreased in size, and the Persians became the dominant force. And of course, this is where we come to the Ahasuerus, who was the king in the story of Esther, also known as Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes I, and Xerxes number one. And the Ahasuerus, as I said, was the fourth in the king. Who was the first of the lineage of the Persians? Well, here's a map. I know you won't be able to see it all, but way over on the left side is Cyrus. He was the first one. He was the one that sent Nehemiah and back to rebuild the walls. And so that was way back in 539 BC, and then followed the Persian kings, Cambyses, then Darius the first, then Xerxes. This is where we're at for this story, Ahasuerus. And then after that was Artaxerxes first, and then it went on from there to where Alexander the Great, and then it went on from there to the Romans. So this is just placing it in history. Hope that does help you. You can see the story, though, is amazing, because when you read the story of Esther, we see that the timeline is here, 483, and then that was when Vashti was removed. Then Esther was chosen, and then we see the battle, the destruction of the implementation of the plan in 473. So it's a 10-year period, if you will. So let's watch this Purim. I'm just coming out of my PowerPoint right now. And we're going to watch the Purim story, a 4-minute animated story. So just so you'll understand very quickly what the Feast of Purim is all about. So here we go.
The Purim holiday takes us back to a time in history when genocide against the Jews was attempted some 2,400 years ago. It marks the Jewish people's rescue from the plot of Haman, a high officer of the Persian Empire and advisor to King Ahasuerus. Haman's rage was incited by a single Jew, Mordecai, who refused to bow before him. Rather than seeking revenge against Mordecai alone, Haman plotted against the entire Jewish people. Haman gained permission from the king, Ahasuerus, to do as he pleased against the Jews. He legislated a pogrom that would wipe out every Jew in the empire on a single blood-soaked day. Haman cast lots to determine the day when he and his minions would destroy the Jews. In leaving this date entirely to chance, Haman's message was unmistakable. The Jews who believed in the providence of a beneficent God would be subject to the blind whim of fate. A casual roll of the dice would be the instrument that seals their end, while the God of the Jews would stand helplessly by. Haman's challenge came at a crucial point in history. His provocations were a test. Was God still relevant in the post-biblical age when open miracles were no longer common and prophecy was coming to an end? In the end, the Jews were saved from Haman's plot, but pointedly, they were saved in a non-miraculous way. In the events of Purim, serendipitous happenings conspired to bring about unexpected results. Alone, each of these events could be seen as nothing more than a fortuitous coincidence, but taken together, they weave a miraculous chain of events orchestrated by God. King Ahasuerus holds a spectacular 6-month feast in the capital city of Shushan. It just so happens that when Queen Vashti refuses to obey the king, he has her eliminated. And when a global beauty contest is held to replace her, it just so happens that Esther, a Jewish girl, is chosen. When palace guards plot to assassinate the king, Mordecai, Esther's relative, happens to overhear and foil the plot. One night, it just so happens that the king can't fall asleep. He asks for the Book of Records, which just so happens to open to the page recording Mordecai's long-forgotten act of loyalty. At that moment, Haman happens to approach the king for permission to hang Mordecai. Instead, Ahasuerus tells Haman to dress Mordecai in the royal robes and parade him on horseback through the streets of Shushan. The heroics of Mordecai and Esther was in recognizing God's hand and taking the necessary action, no matter how challenging it may be. When Esther fears approaching the king uninvited because one could be killed for such presumptuousness, Mordecai tells her it is certain that the Jewish people will be saved one way or another. God promised it will never be destroyed. The only question, Esther, is if you will rise to the challenge God has given you, enabling redemption to come through your hand. This is your big moment, the reason for which you were born. At the climactic moment, Esther hosts a banquet where she reveals that she is Jewish and exposes Haman for planning genocide against her people. The king is shocked and orders that Haman be hanged on the very same gallows he prepared for Mordecai. Ahasuerus grants the Jews the right to defend themselves on the 13th of the month of Adar, the day of the planned attack. The Jews defeat their enemies, including Haman's 10 sons, who, like their father before them, are hanged on the gallows. Mordecai enacts an annual holiday with feasting, giving gifts to poor, and food to friends. Appropriately, the holiday is called Purim, literally, lots that are cast, commemorating how Haman's worldview that everything is determined by chance was overturned by the Jewish ideal that God is present. Chekhov once said that if a rifle lies above the mantel in Act 1 of a play, it had better go off by Act 3. The mark of a good playwright is that no plot element is superfluous. Everything ultimately has a role, and the same goes for the great playwright in the sky. Everything we humans do has its role in the play we call life, but not necessarily in the way we imagine. The Book of Esther does not mention the name of God, and that's the whole point. The message of Purim is that God is here even when he doesn't seem to be. God's presence in history is felt not just when the sea splits or when divine fire descends upon a mountain in full view of the entire nation. God is present in the everyday workings of life and history as well. We all have choices to make. That is how we cast our lots in life. But what happens after we make the choice is no longer up to us. Purim demonstrates that God is in complete control, even when he remains behind the scenes. Without the fanfare of miracles, in the space between human choice and the ultimate result, the master of the universe will yet have his say.
Amen. So as we see here, that's the story of Purim in 4 minutes. And I want to just go on and continue on in my PowerPoint and bring forth a few other thoughts about Purim. Okay. So here we go. The 4 mitzvot of Purim. These are the 4 laws that every Jewish person practicing their faith is required to do during Purim. And one is listening to the readings of the Megillah, that's the Book of Esther, once in the morning and once in the daytime. Sorry, did I say morning? Once in the evening and then in the day somewhere in the day of Purim. And they also had to send gifts of food to family and friends, 2 gifts, And they can be to the same person, by the way, it can be the same gift even, but 2 gifts to family and friends. And then they have to give charity, 2 gifts of charity for the needy and the poor. And these gifts of charity must be the equivalent of a meal that you would buy in a restaurant. And it has to be to 2 different people. It can't be the same person. And then they must eat a festive meal and drink plentifully. Now, for the Jewish people, many of them, the drinking plentifully is a great delight. In others, it is a problem, but you're supposed to drink plentifully. And so they, again, many take advantage of that, and maybe too much. But again, let me just go through the celebration of Purim, some of the customs. The Jewish people wear dress in costumes. People dress in costumes, I should say, and wear a mask. Where does that come from? Well, perhaps because Esther's identity was concealed, that she was a Jew until near the end of the story. So the 15th century in Europe is where this tradition really grew, where they wear costumes, they wear masks. Jews celebrate Purim for 1 or 2 days. Now in Esther 9, Book of Esther 9, verse 19 and 21, it talks about they did a 1 extra day for those who were in a walled city because they had to extend the battle. Of course, we were talking about Shushan and in Persia, which is now Iran, but the battle had to go for an extra day to make sure that all the haters of Israel, all the ones who wanted Israel, that were following Haman and his orders, that they would all be dealt with. And so now to present day, the Jews in Jerusalem celebrated on the 2nd day. The Jews all the rest of the world celebrated on the 1st day, which would be the 14th of Adar, and then for all around the world, and then the 15th of Adar in Jerusalem, a walled city, and that's specific in Esther 9:21 talks about the walled city. Now, many people in Jerusalem celebrated on 2 days. Now, they also use Gregors, and whenever the name of Haman is read, because it talks about blotting out the name of Haman or Haman, I'll say Haman, both pronunciations, 54 times in the Book of Esther, the name of Haman. So Jewish people love this. The children love it because what they do, they stomp their feet and they use a Gregor, a noise maker. You can see it here, the blue and the red, and clack, clack, clack. And they, sometimes write Haman on the bottom of their shoes and stomp whenever the word Haman. Also, another tradition is they use this special pastry. It's in a triangular form filled with poppy seeds, sometimes filled with jams, filled with something sweet, and it's called, what is it called? It's called a Hamantaschen. It's Yiddish. Actually, literally, it means Haman's pockets. In the Hebrew, it's called Ozni Haman, which means Haman's ear. And where did this come from? Well, there's different places, different sources have different ideas on where this began. Some would say, well, he wore a triangular hat. Some would say that it's his ear. Some would say it's his pocket, whatever. But it's called Hamantaschen normally, certainly in Hebrew, in Israel, very often Ozni Haman. And so these are things that they celebrate. Some lessons. Let me just go and conclude with some lessons from the Book of Esther. Remember that God is sovereign and supreme, even if his presence is not evident. Remember, his name is not mentioned. And I just put this up. God is not mentioned anywhere in the entire Book of Esther, yet it is obvious that he was quietly at work behind the scenes, setting up the downfall of Haman and the deliverance of his people. We can see how he orchestrated all the events which were necessary for the fulfilling of his plan. The removal of Queen Vashti, the king's choice of Esther, Mordecai's discovery of the assassination plot, the king's insomnia, the servant's choice of what to read to the king that night, and the timing of Haman's arrival. I mean, it all just so happened. By coincidence? No, God was working to bring it about. Another point, God removes people and raises up people to bring forth his divine purpose. We need to understand this as well as Christians, as believers. And of course, Vashti had to be removed. Esther had to be put in place to fulfill God's plan. And God had to bring forth Mordecai, who ended up being the right-hand man of King Ahasuerus. So again, we see God's hand there. God will not allow the Jews to be destroyed. And for all of us, we need to understand that God will not allow the Jews to be destroyed. Look at in Esther 4, verse 13 and 14. And Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think that your heart, remember this is Mordecai responding to the fact that he's challenging Esther to go and seek an audience with the king. He says, do not think in your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Did you see this? His promise is Mordecai saying, that God will deliver the Jews. He will protect them. But if you won't do it, then you and your father's house will perish. But God will do it. That's an amazing statement. So Esther had to make the decision, and she made a good decision, a right decision. And then, of course, God will continue always to defend the Jewish people. That should be ingrained in us. He will always defend. In Esther 9:28, and it says, and these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. So God was saying, I want you to remember that I will protect, that I will continue to be faithful to the Jewish people. He says that these days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, and that the memory of them should not perish among the descendants. So every Purim, that should be the message. God will not fail to defend the Jewish people. Another point, God's purposes and plans may involve risk for us as we listen to his voice. Another one, a great message for us as believers, as Christians, because there is going to be risk. And there was a risk for Esther. And so when Esther made that decision that she would go, she says, and I will go to the king, which is against the law. She knew that her life may be taken, but she says, if I perish, I perish. So praise the Lord. And many of us may have to make that decision sometime in the future as well. Now, God's favor is upon us when we stand in courage and obedience. So whenever we're called to do one of these acts, God will stand in courage and obedience with us. And so as it happened, Esther, God did stand with it. And we see in Esther 5, verse 2, so it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court. Of course, at that point, it could have been a thumbs down or a thumbs up, but she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went out near and touched the top of the scepter. And of course, the rest of the story unfolds. Now, of course, another point, saving your own life is not always the best option. And many people are not willing to give their life unto death, as it were. They're not willing to go that far. But in Esther 4:14, it says, for if you remain completely silent at this time, and deliverance will arise to the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And so God is saying, please, please make the right choice. Deliverance from evil may require action in a battle. Now, it was the king could not reverse his decision, so he gave the Jews the empowerment to defend themselves. And it says, by these letters, as in Esther 8, by these letters the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives. God didn't just stop the whole thing in this case. He gave the Jews the power by legislation to act, to destroy, kill, annihilate all the forces of any peoples of the province that would assault them. So the Jews were going to be involved in this. And on the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. And it goes on to say, the Jews gathered together in the cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could withstand them, because the fear of them fell upon all people. Isn't that amazing? The fear fell upon the people. And then, of course, the next point, trust God to change your mourning into joy. I mean, it was a time of great mourning and concern when the decree was first made that all the Jews were to be killed in the kingdom of Persia. And in Esther 8, it says, so Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel, blue and white, with great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan, what happened to the mourning? Rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. Then it goes on in the next verse. And in every province and every city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had what? Joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because the fear of the Jews fell on them. Wow, whoa, that's amazing. I end with this. God honors fasting and prayer. And I know as believers, fasting is not a thing that we like to do. Prayer is sometimes a thing we don't do enough of. But in Esther 4:3, it says, and in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. But God turned it around. So does fasting, does prayer work? Absolutely. And this is a model for us. And then in Esther 4, verse 15 and 16, then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan, fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise. So praise the Lord, the power of prayer and fasting. So I want to end it just there and bring this to a close and just say, those are some of the lessons. Those are some of the things that when you look at Purim, and remember, we as believers, we as Christians can apply the principles that we can learn from Purim. So I want to just say again, Chag Sameach Purim to you as it comes up, as it may be whenever you're watching this video, but Chag Sameach Purim, happy Purim, and happy holiday. God bless you, and thank you.